Hi everyone, this is Denise with Liquid Color, and today we are going to be taking a look at watercolor and ink. Now in this video, I am going to be using, as you can see here, my silver black velvet brush size 6, this adorable reference picture of a baby lynx cub that I took a couple of years ago when I was still working at the zoo, and I have printed that image out 3 times and traced that onto my paper using my light box. Now, in this video, we are going to go ahead and take a look first at what a watercolor only painting looks like, followed by watercolor and then ink, and finally ink and then watercolor. Now, this is one of the topics that my patrons voted on that they wanted to see here on the channel, and when I first started off with watercolors, I used pen and ink quite a bit. I really liked the style of that, and it has quite a different look depending on how you approach the subject. So let's first go ahead and take a look at me painting this little lynx using only watercolor. Now, the things that I'm going to focus on here are shading and edges and making sure that everything is really well defined because I'm not going to have the ink to fall back on later. You're going to see me utilizing shadow colors more often with darker browns and even some grays later on, and especially when we get to the facial features, actually using a dark gray to do some outlining to provide the dark colors that I would need to use on the face. On the second image, I'm going to be doing watercolor first, so I'm going to follow these beginning stages very similarly as the first one. However, in the back of my mind, I know that I'm going to be using ink a little bit later on. Now, I did have a watercolor instructor when I had first started getting into watercolors. I wanted to take a class, and I took a class at one of my local adult education schools, and she always used to say that you can fix anything with ink. So if you were working on a watercolor painting and something went horribly awry, you could add ink and everything would be fine. And that's true, I think, for the most part. It can fix a lot of blunders or edges or things that happen that you didn't mean for them to happen that way. So it's a nice tool, but I do like to use it kind of not to fall back on, but rather to enhance a drawing. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit. Now, this last drawing, I apologize, while I was working on it, the sun started to come through the window, so there's going to be a little missing clip in the footage, and then it's going to skip ahead, and it's going to be a little bit darker. But I tried to even out the footage as much as I can. Now, in this third one, I'm doing my ink first, and I'm going to be tracing over my lines, drawing in a lot of the detail, doing some of the fur texture, all with the ink. Now, this is going to provide me with an almost like a coloring book sheet to then put watercolor on top of when we come back to it a little bit later. Now, unlike a lot of coloring books, I don't want to do solid lines, so I am going to be using sketchy lines to still give it that nice furry feeling because it is still supposed to be a lynx, and I'm using a lot of the scribble kind of texture, not really cross-hatching or hatching. And Cricket, what on earth are you doing? She is messing with some papers behind me. Alright, so after the light came in that window, I took a break so that I could wait till the lighting was better on later on in the afternoon, and then I came back to it. So now I'm going in with a gray over this first painting here, and again I'm doing those edges, those lines around the ears that are darker in my reference photo with that dark gray color. Now, an advantage of using watercolor over the ink is that if you're going for, oh my goodness, Crickets! Oh my goodness, like I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, is that when you are using watercolor only, you can go for this really soft look. You can fade out your lines in some areas like I did with the corners of the lynx eye so that you don't have any of these really hard areas. Now, I did make a mistake, and this is something to know on our right, so the right eye if we're looking at it, but the lynx's left eye, I made that too narrow, and there's not a real good way for me to fix that with my watercolor brush, and that can often happen when you're putting in darks with watercolors, and they can be really hard to take away. Now, of course, you can't take away ink either, but there's a little bit more control typically over a brush or over a pen than a brush because we're more used to using instruments like that. Now I'm going to switch back to that middle painting here and put in some more shadows and details. But I'm going to leave everything that was dark in the first painting alone because I'm going to be putting that in with pen in a little bit here. Now, the thing that I think I enjoy most about working with the pen first followed by the watercolor is that you've already done all the hard work by the time that you get to the watercolor with the pen, so it's really fun and freeing just to kind of fill in your colors, and you don't have to be too careful about it, honestly. You kind of want some areas to go over the lines that they're put in or not quite go to the edges, and so I really enjoy that about working with watercolor over ink. Now you're going to see shortly when I move back to the middle box here that when I go to put in my ink, I've been keeping in mind the whole time that I was going to do so. So my watercolor isn't quite as detailed as in the first one. And I also am able to be a little bit more loose than I am in the last example where we did the ink first. I don't have the set lines from the pencils to go off of, and rather I can kind of follow the spirit of wherever my watercolors took me in the painting and kind of put in details however I want to. There is a technical difference between the middle and the last one, and that is that when you put ink over the water treated paper with watercolors, the lines are a little bit larger and looser and freer. I use the same size pen on both of these, but you'll see at the end when I show kind of a zoomed out version that the last one has very, very fine lines. When you put that ink directly on the paper, there's a lot more detail and control, versus in the middle version, you've got some looser, freer lines. Alright, so finally we're going to take a look at all three of these side by side, and now these are just sketches. I didn't do these as full paintings. I think everything together took me a little over an hour to paint, whereas I would probably spend twice that much time on one of these images. But this watercolor painting, there's a lot of detail in there for what it is, and I made sure to use lots of layers and lots of different values to get the colors and the textures that I wanted. In the second one, I still have a lot of that detail with the watercolor because I wanted to make sure that that was there as a foundation. And then you've got these really loose and thicker, I think kind of more characteristic, not characteristics, but they have more character than the third image that we're going to look at. And finally, we have a more technical drawing where we've got a lot of the detail drawn in with the pens with a quick wash over the top. With, you know, not quite as much detail with the watercolors, but a lot more emphasis on the ink itself. So that was just a quick overview of these three different kind of styles that you can use of just watercolor or watercolor with ink over the top or ink with watercolor on top. And if you'd like to know anything more about watercolor and pen and ink, if you have specific questions, let me know in the comments below. And if you have a topic that I feel like I can make a whole other video about, I will do that in the future. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons for suggesting this video and for supporting the channel. And I will see you next time.